Morning, Gerri. I've got a sore throat this morning, so I'm sounding very husky.
Oh, wow. Merry Christmas.
Oh, I know. If we've calculated this correctly, this ep will be a Christmas special. Woohoo. We are so professional.
How are you going with the overwhelm?
You mean this being, I don't want to claim this loudly or proudly, but my secret city has won the award for the longest lockdown in the bloody world. Woohoo! It's a global title. We're all exhausted. We're all just really over it. We're just bored and
yes,
there's a lot of unrest around the place. Everyone's very irritated with each other and that sort of thing. And what else? I think we're all just looking forward to Christmas because last year everybody went to visit family, of course, as you do. You need to remind yourself of why you don't live with family anymore and why it's a good idea to become independent.
Yes.
And then at Christmas, New Year's Eve, our great leader of this secret state issued a directive when everyone had to bolt for the border or be locked out of the state. So you had to get Nan and the toddlers and all the skateboards and the boogie boards in the car and off to the border. Of course, it was a lovely, calm procession across the border. There wasn't any lines, or I'm being sarcastic again. Anyway, so we were in our state of origin, Gerri. Can't get away from it at Christmas. So we had to put the car on a truck and fly home. We drove because we like to drive up, to the old homestead. Drive up.
I don't know where to go with all of this. I guess what will really help you is that Christmas overwhelm, the tsunami of materialism and sometimes food. That's just going to set us all up well.
So I've got a bit of, because it's our Christmas episode, Gerri, I thought we could have a bit of a reflection on the story so far, where we've gone. And I wanted to bring a little bit of attention and focus, if we could, to introduce a wee bit more mindfulness into the sessions. I know it's not your favourite thing, but I wanted to just gently cast the microscope over what goes on between you and myself, because we've got a few new listeners. Welcome aboard. We're not breaking the fourth wall, but welcome aboard. And there are some folks that are very, very interested in the polarity and the dichotomy between the counselling college and the clinical college in psychology, and I think if we consider these as roles rather than autonomous definitive categories, and this might be hard for you because it might be a bit of a reality challenge for you, I don't know. But I mean, you've spoken at great length about, being a clinical psychologist being a big part of your personal identity. And I think the line between the personal and the professional for psychologists is, well, it's hard to articulate. It's hard to be confident where that line is. And I thought if we could explore it using our relationship as a kind of container for that, or not, if there's an edge, that's also useful. It doesn't matter what we discover, it's still helpful. So if there's an edge there, that's informative to people wondering about this dilemma, like what is the difference? How does it play out?
They are symbolic roles, because I should say,
so.
In full disclosure, I'm not a member of the clinical college of the APS. And the reason for that, paradoxically, is I don't feel that the APS stands up enough for clinical psychologists. So I am actually part of an organisation which is the Australian Clinical Psychology Association.
And I know it's going to be challenging for us to do what we can to stick to the symbolic representation of these. Like because I want to cover some of the themes that have cropped up in the secondary process going on between us. So our primary process is we're two awesome, terrific psychologists having a dialogue. One of us is a clinical psych, one of us is a counselling psych. That's our primary process. Maybe when we're both women, probably identifying with a female gender. We're of a particular age where shapewear is appreciated and we need bathrooms close by. that sort of thing. That's our primary process.
Like all middle-aged white women, we have
for example,
the exquisite privilege of being able to whinge about the generation below us and the generation above us.
So this team would be our primary process. And in the psychodynamic world, this is the me, and everything else is not me. But make progress in psychotherapy, you want to gently bring attention to where those two, the me and the not me, meet, and just sort of, have a bit of a wander around there and see what we think. And I can feel myself getting a little bit excited or nervous. So what interested me about this dialogue with you was what Jung called numinosity. There was something inspiring for me about this, and I'm a bit carnivorous. I'll be honest with you, Gerri. There was very strong self-interest in it for me, as much as an intense, powerful curiosity. And in the trade, this intense, powerful curiosity can be called the desire of the therapist. Now, without the desire of the therapist, it's very hard to get good outcomes for the client, because you become an other for your client. And if you look at them through a judgmental or a critical eye, even if you don't intend it, they'll pick it up, and that gaze can come across as predatory or, carnivorous or persecutory. It's it's a very subtle thing. Now, this falls into the category of what we would call in the trade a secondary process. There's stuff going on in the background in the realm of the not me. Now, you could call that the unconscious if you want, but there's also all the stuff you don't know. There's lots of that. Like the chair sitting next to me could be a not me. I think of it as not me. But if from a certain point of view, maybe the chair is a me. Righto. It depends. If I was psychotic, say, for example, or something like that.
The chair looks quite. The chair is yellow. The chair looks quite extroverted, yet also knows when to fade into the background. There
you go. Secondary dreaming process wants attention. Look at me. There you go. Good catch, Gerri. Well done. Righto. That was the basics. There's a few themes that have rocked up in because I do a bit of the editing and a bit of the back end for our little podcast, and we've got a theme of a predator that wanders around a lot. We've got the metaphor of, unconsciously and with a joke, comparing psychology to prostitution, and these metaphors link the primary and the secondary process, and it's very hard to get into the secondary process without a relationship of trust with the person you're working with and a feeling of safety. And I think in our little podcast, I'm not sure we've been able to create enough safety, and because that theme pops up all the time in our conversations. So I just wanted to round that up and flop that out and see where that took our conversation. I can see that you're very thoughtful demeanor there, Gerri, so I'm encouraged by that. That's great feedback. So what do you make of that we've, what do you make of that?
Always thoughtful. I think the predatory other this is a very concrete analysis of that, but Four Corners has done a special on Sony Music, right? And it was an incredibly toxic workplace, according to, and it's thought that this continued for many years and is mainly down to the actions of one person. At least this was the thesis as put forward by Four Corners. Now, I know absolutely nothing about the music industry. Squat.
Right.
But what I gather from this is I think that there are predatory people or people who become seduced by money and power, or people who are unsafe, under pressure, and cannot be threatened in any way, so have to defend themselves and their work and their state of being. That these dimensions of humanity exist everywhere in every profession. I guess I would argue from my experience, and this is where the sex worker metaphor comes in, I would argue from my experience that small business particularly can enable that to flourish. I think you've put forward in various ways that the university, the tertiary education sector, allows that to flourish as well. The pressure, the big egos, and always feeling unsafe. There's always something at stake. There's always going to be a new policy or a new round of redundancies or new cuts. So I think under certain conditions, and thank goodness we don't have a recession, because you and I can access our ages and leverage the good part of our middle-agedness, which is that we remember the recession of the early 90s.
Oh, yes. That was bad.
People were just terrible to each other.
That's true.
I worked in PR, which is hard.
Did you, Gerri?
It's hard to believe.
It's not that much of a shock when I really think about it, Like I think some of us can see that. Yes. Bit of ab-fab going on with you, sure.
Yeah. Anyway, it was horrible, and it was horrible during that recession time. And
so
I think under certain conditions, I think that the contingencies, this is very behavioural, but if the contingencies are there, people will act in competitive and horrible ways.
Oh God, now this is annoying to me. My little sorry,
it was really heartfelt. I'm sorry if it was annoying. No, I know.
No, you're not annoying. My bloody iPad's just decided to need the battery. Just hold on, Gerri. We're having some brief little.
Okay, I'll tell a story.
Shall I tell a
story?
Oh, because it's going to go pear-shaped otherwise.
Shall I tell a story about an interaction I won with a competitor, or does that just place me as the predator?
Well, no. Do you know what? I'm loving. Just go for it. The idea with psychotherapy is just steer for authenticity, and then we make sense of it. We make sense of it on the fly. So we want to go for it. And then
I ran into someone who was pretty much an enemy.
Good. No, this is awesome. I love a moment when you hit an enemy.
I just walked past them, and they were wearing a kind of flowing sort of kimono jacket thing. It was very middle-aged woman visiting an art gallery.
Do you know that's a comfortable look, that look,
I think she wasn't wearing it ironically. Because of that, I feel like I won that interaction. I feel like surfwear. I feel like flannel shirts, maybe even the puffy vest or the hipster glasses.
You're so funny.
You can wear ironically, but the flowy kimono.
The moo-moo.
Anyway, I feel like I won that interaction merely because I wasn't wearing a flowing kimono jacket. Sometimes I feel like I win interactions if I have my bicycle with me.
So I'm going to pounce, Gerri. I want to pounce now.
I ran into somebody at the train station and I had my bicycle. So I felt like I won that interaction as well.
You felt a sense of competitiveness now see, when the competitiveness is the me version of the predator that lurks in the not me. And it's not.
There you go. The predator's in all of us, isn't it?
That's right.
Or put another way, we can view this through so many lenses.
But let's not stop there, because what excites me about psychology is not to recap the content, is not to list endlessly the models that describe the phenomenon. What interests me is the transformation. And without that, I don't actually have the energy to keep going, is the truth. Like, I'm only interested in transforming things. Everything else bores me.
I'm interested in different ways to understand things, and through that, or following.
Oh dear, I've got the battery on.
Are different ways to help people.
So if we drill that down, if we drill that down till we got there's a me and a not me in what we're talking about here. And I just want to get the lead pencil out, the charcoal out, and start sketching it a little bit, right? So I think, and I'm going to symbolically link this to clinical psychology from my observations of you and that part of your identity. I perceive my observation to you, my gaze of the other to you, this is what I see. I think you want to steer closely to that which you can retain in your conscious focal primary point of attention. And therefore you want to stay strictly within the bounds of your primary process. That's my hypothesis to you as a symbolic representation of clinical psychology. Now, if this has got legs, it will have a couple of problems. It will cause a couple of problems for you because, of course, well, according to psychodynamic theory and perhaps anyone who doesn't understand everything about life and the world and everything, there are things we don't know, right? And they keep smacking you on the head, like you'll have a little crisis or find yourself watching, engaging in some addictive behaviour maybe, or something that you're not sure why you're doing it, and how do we handle that? Because the old Jung and the old Freud, who have a lot of deep wisdom, and when you really look at their techniques and use them, and I've used them for a long time, they're bloody powerful. So there's value that comes from putting these two positions in dialogue with each other. And I just wondered I'm just trying to gently sculpt the positions. And I suppose if I take the other side of that dialogue, it would be more trying to sit in, observe, be with, do a bit of something like mindfulness, more experiential knowledge or not description of just the feeling of it. Like what are we feeling? Because I've noticed, Gerri, and I had to bring this up with you, my motivation and excitement to see you's been flagging in the last
It's hard to believe.
No, well, it's probably not you. It's probably the role you're occupying in my perception of what we're up to. And I'm finding that the focal point and only on the primary process is it's losing life force and numinosity for me. And I'm a bit sad about that, but I do need to own it and own up to it, because if I don't, I'll just keep pushing on and I'll get nowhere. I want to pursue, like a predator, the numinosity. It's a sort of spark, a life force, something that's pulling me forward. And it seems to be fading, Gerri. I'm a bit sad about that, but I have to bring it up with you because otherwise it'll become a big secondary process and smack me on the head. So I'm just having a bit of trouble. I don't know if the pot's going off the boil or the fire's going out, or I'm not good enough, which could very well be the case. I'm happy to own that. I might not be up to the challenge, which would be very upsetting on me and maybe others. Anyway, there's some thoughts, some pre-associated stream of consciousness sort of thoughts about the situation. And even though it's not categorised and structured, there's something real about the way I just described my experience to you in the moment.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that, Gerri? What comes up?
I think there are many, many ways to grow. There's many ways to know what you don't know. I don't think any of them are easy. All of them are hard, and the more methodical the learning is, probably the better. There's a number of reasons why I think that. I have to give a story.
Okay, let's have a story. Yep, stories are good.
You'll like this story. It's a really nice story. I was in the car with my family. This is some years ago, and my son was in kindy.
Oh.
And cute parental stuff coming up. Warning, trigger warning, if that stuff makes you revolted and sick and bored. Skip ahead. And just incidental to his kindiness, by a quirk of geography and SES, in his kindy class, there were two mothers studying psychology.
Oh, yes.
There was a forensic psych.
Oh,
and there were two clinical psychs.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if it was awesome.
It wasn't awesome. Okay,
I learned how to enter the school, pick up my child, and exit the school without actually ever seeing or running into anyone. Which is perhaps a window of empathy into people with social anxiety. I always ask a sufferer of social anxiety, do you have certain paths that you take so that you don't run into anyone? And they always say, yes, I do.
True. No, that is absolutely a big character trait of someone. We call that, don't we call that, Gerri, in the trade, we call that a bit of avoidance, and it can become a big problem.
We do call that a bit of avoidance, but sometimes we all avoid, and it's because you just don't have the capacity. Anyway, we were in the car and we were traveling, and we went past the Captain Cook Hotel.
Did you?
And I think it says something about our country that the fact that we went past the Captain Cook Hotel does not identify the city and does not even identify the suburb within the city.
That's true. Actually, that's very white supremacist of us.
Yes. So the little guy pipes up and says, they never name buildings after Aboriginal people. I was blown away and impressed. The Charles Perkins Centre, I guess, is the exception that proves the rule. So yes, and he's right. And later we were doing a short bushwalk, and he said, let's pause here and think about the Aboriginal people.
He was picking up on the dream time because he was a little kid.
At one level, that's certainly what I hope. On the other level, he may just wanted a break and some snacks.
Well, he's a little kid. That could all be true at the same time.
That could all be true. There's many realities. And the reason why he knew this stuff, I can take absolutely no credit for this, is his kindy teacher was a Yawara woman, and they are the traditional owners of the land around Broome, that kind of area.
Yeah.
And she also grew up in the Gold Coast. And
wow.
So there was enough Queensland there for me
as
to
well.
Connect
we had some
to.
storylines there.
I mean, Gold Coast people have a certain sense of fashion and personal grooming. They don't have resort wear. That's just their entire cupboard.
Yes. That's true. Don't even laugh about that.
Yeah. So she was really, really teaching to the kindy class Indigenous issues really well, as I think was illustrated by my son, because he also said to me once, he gave the teacher's name and said her squad are Yawara, her language is Yawara, her place is Yawara.
I love that. Wow,
and I think he was getting squad mixed up with mob.
Okay.
The idea was there. The idea was there. And I feel a bit disappointed in myself because I haven't built on this. But you can see that someone who learned these things in this way is going, I hope, is going to be open to constructs like the stolen generation,
it's just the tip of the
racism,
iceberg.
personal racism.
Yeah.
And I guess this is my point, that sometimes we need to learn things methodically. And when we learn things methodically, when that is delivered to us in both an authentic, and sometimes that doesn't happen, right? But when it's delivered in an authentic and methodical way, the learning and the true understanding is.
Oh, Oh dear, we've frozen.
It's better. That is just a story that illustrates.
Okay, just hit the pause button.
One of the ways I think.
Hit the pause button. So there's when we grab structure, that's a primary process move, right? Which means if we just move ourselves into the observer consciousness, I'm just noticing what you're doing when you say that, Gerri. Whenever we go for absolutist, extremist positions, there's usually something going on in the secondary process that's about fear. And usually there's like a feeling of threat in the room that we're not articulating, but that sits behind the desire for structure. And when that becomes a culture, it's a problem. It's a problem because it marginalizes other perspectives. And of course, human beings are massively diverse, especially in Australia. So yes, we need structure. We do need form, but not at the expense of people's lives or valuing them as human beings or valuing their experiences or their ways of speaking and telling stories. And I think clinical psychology is a story, and it can, and I'm inviting self-reflection about this, it can become close to an extremist political movement if you're not careful, because it focuses exclusively on the frontal, on the conscious mind. It doesn't deal with the things that are hard to articulate. It doesn't validate that easily because it's very, and it has its place. I'm not saying it doesn't have its place. I just think, how do we allow for that strong structure, which is needed in many situations, and at the same time make room for the other to have a dialogue?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
That is the challenge.
I would also say, and I put forward strongly that all professions, and when I say all professions, of course, I mean all domains of psychology, have their difficulties with their identity. And
I think we've discovered that, haven't we?
Are probably exacerbated by institutional contingencies and parameters and even demographic forces. I've got up somewhere. I've got up Psychology Board of Australia registrant data.
Okay.
And it talks about, here we are. It talks about the percentage and the number of different kinds of registered psychs in Australia.
Yeah. What are the numbers showing at the minute?
I've got to find it in a hurry.
No, don't panic. Just I'll
because
do
I was
some
also
filling.
Because what prompted me to look into this, believe it or not, was actually gender issues. I was trying to establish quickly what was the percentage in gender in psychology in general. Okay.
Just while you're working that out, let's talk a bit more about that conflict that individuals can have, communities can have over a primary process that is what we are allowed to say, what feels okay and safe to say, the me part of the conversation, the conflict with the other side, the not me. If this conflict is not addressed consciously, it will be acted out unconsciously it stops being symbolic and it will be played out as a real phenomenon. So, when we all have the tendency to have an in-group and out-group identity as a way of trying to feel safe, as a way of dealing with safety threats. And if we don't become self-aware and conscious about this, and I believe this as psychologists, we have to become the leaders of doing this, because who else is equipped to do it? Nobody in our communities. I can't think of anybody who's got enough training.
Yeah.
And even the intellectual ability to try and do this. It's very hard to do. But maybe, psychotherapists are probably perhaps even better trained. Who knows? They're probably more practiced at this. But I think we could experiment with the idea of becoming self-aware about the violent tendencies within ourselves and and really trying to make friends with and own and integrate that predatory force. You can't ever get rid of the predator because we're all part of us is an animal. You can't ever get rid of the tendency towards competitiveness, which in its darker form can be violent and malevolent. But we can become self-aware about it and progressively integrate this part of ourselves. So we don't have to act it out on our colleagues or clients even.
Do you have some examples of that process within yourself? Because
I think we've covered.
Give a lot of personal examples, and I think
I've told a lot of stories on our podcast about the way this plays out within the profession, about being targeted by clinical psychologists and
but you as the predator, you as the hostile one.
Oh, I mean, it's the hostile one. Something that's like easy to digest. Okay, so I think when you're trying to, there's a way to do this unconsciously, like, schoolyard situation, just try and defend yourself or ganging up on somebody or something like that. But hopefully we kind of grow into that. But I think when it's time for you to right a past wrong or something like that, or challenge a client, you need to be able to shapeshift into that predator and pounce for it to be effective, and then shapeshift out of it and return back into a compassionate, kindly practitioner. It's not very specific, but I suppose like we have spoken briefly about what happened to my thesis. I won't name any of the protagonists, but basically my supervisor didn't return my thesis, and I originally got what would have been a first class honours, but through various stages of I don't know how to explain this quickly, but she sort of wanted to hang on to my thesis and didn't return it. And there's a big question mark about plagiarising ideas out of that thesis. But all this happened 25 years ago. So because that was covered up even at the time and I was very young, I needed to become a predator to stalk that situation and figure out how to proceed through it, how to get it. And it's got to the point where it's now sitting with the registrar. Who knows what will happen next, but I may need to revisit that, become the predator. And you have to get into the energy of being a ruthless attack dog, but you can't be mindless or it won't work.
You have to be very strong. It's good that you've given that example, because I give many examples, and it may well be that examples come up a bit more because I work in a large institution, so often these are kind of live issues.
Well, because this incident happened in my early life, it had a long-term effect on my ability to join organisations, Gerri. So these kinds of injustices, it's not like you recover from them. They actually change the course of your life. And it puts you in a not me category within the community. Like there's a high status or a functional or acceptable part of the community where opportunities come, people are healthy generally. There's problems still, but they're not as bad as on the fringes or outside that perimeter of light where you can't see what's going on. And that was where my life got catapulted. And I had to, from that position, try and work my way back to something so basically everything I wanted to achieve as an individual was completely blocked because of what this woman did to me with my thesis. And I do have some evidence of what occurred. I was able to compile a evidentiary timeline and which helps a bit, but it's not like there's a court you can go and present this evidence to. It's a lot more complicated than that. You need an advocate and you need allies. And because I was placed in this position, I became a source of because obviously I had particular abilities or a bit of a spark, who knows what. Some people found me interesting for one reason or the other, but I didn't get to make my way in the world based on that because of what she did to me. So a situation like that requires a predator to become because predators are incredibly instinctive and they are hungry as hell. And they sort of can't stop sniffing food. That's kind of the vibe of a predator. And you need that kind of energy to hunt down a person who's done that to you. and try to do what you can to. But
yes,
the reality,
or even to protect yourself.
That's true. But on the outside, there are mentally ill psychologists, unfortunately, and I tended to face off with them fairly regularly because of the position I was in the community, you might say, because of what this woman did to me when I was a young person. So there's lots of opportunities there's lots of predator examples in my journey from the outside to the inside, and I find it very offensive. And the other thing that I discovered along the way was the role my Indigenous ancestry plays in my life, and just how marginalised that worldview is from our white communities in Australia. So there's many storylines trying to find a place on the platform, and the mindset or the worldview or the framework that clinical psychology wants to operate from doesn't make any room for those things. And I found it becomes a force of, well, in my life, a force of darkness, Gerri. And I know that's perhaps not everybody's story. And through dialogue with yourself, I can see how, we've categorised you in lots of different ways, but, you've got that tendency towards being a J, let's say. So the framework works very well for you. It sits very comfortably in your worldview, but it doesn't in mine. It's a source of oppression and injustice and violence.
The force of darkness is not in any one particular profession.
No.
The force of darkness flourishes under certain conditions. And
well, it's easy to say that when you're not on the fringes. If you're on the fringes, it's everywhere.
And sometimes, you just get sick of it. You get sick of the microaggressions. You get sick of having to defend. And I don't know what the solution is here, like that if people can be nice to each other.
Well, I think the solution's inner work. You have to look for that. You have to be willing to look inside and go, where is that predatory tendency within me and how do I relate to it? When does it come? And you can't force a person to do inner work, but what I've discovered and I've worked therapeutically with a number of clinical psychologists over the years as well, they seem to have a tendency towards, in my humble, small view, a tendency towards perfectionist thinking and a strong unwillingness to look inside, to look at themselves. And I don't know why that's so scary. Because they want their clients to do that. What is the problem? Why is that hard, do we think?
I don't know. Isn't it hard for everyone?
Not if you're a client, not if you're suffering. And this is where the predatory gaze of the other can be perpetrated by the clinical psychologists themselves without knowing it.
Or the counselling psychologist.
Well, let's just focus on the clinical psychologists, because counselling psychs are more protected from this because they're more willing to sit in diversity. They're not so strong on this is the only way to do it. If you say this is the only way to do everything, if your framework is that strong, you immediately generate a very powerful other. And there's an unwillingness to go, well, where is that diversity within me? Because if you can make a relationship with diversity within yourself as a practitioner, you don't have to use your client to do the inner work for you.
Yeah. And one of the ways that I think is really helpful to increase diversity within your mind, I mean, I guess that's what we're really talking about, or increased diversities, is different facets, different viewpoints, different learnings.
And yeah, that's true. But I would like to see clinical psychology be more willing to look at the person of the practitioner, to focus on developing self-reflective practice and developing the self. Like separate from being a clinical psychologist, have an identity that, yes, I practice clinical psychology, but I am also a diverse, flawed being, and I can declare that openly. I'm able to articulate that. I'm able to be in a relationship with that. I don't have to be perfect.
Yes.
And in order to embrace that, there has to be a willingness to sit with, understand, unpack what is that awful feeling of uncertainty, that awful feeling of not being safe. And this is where we come right back to the theme of the predator lurking around. It shows up in our little podcasts. And I think there's a bit of it casts a shadow towards the metaphor of prostitution as well, because the theme of prostitution, I had to think about this quite deeply. Like, why is this coming up a lot? It's because there's an exploitation feeling that goes on. And I think if you internalize that and take it away from the counselling room, go, I'm actually exploiting myself to do this work without getting anything out of it. I keep giving, I give. I might be repeating a childhood story. Well, It's interesting, yeah. I just think that, this is the sort of conversation that I was keen to have. And I can't speak for all the listeners. I don't know. They're all a diverse bunch. They've got their own reasons for listening. But I think the counselling psychics I've spoken to about this project want to support the profession to develop, want to support individuals in the profession to develop their personhood, their sense of self, and ultimately improve their ability to offer some sort of help to the nation. Because without self-reflection and the ability to go, where am I a white colonial supremacist? Where am I an Indigenous person? Where am I a predator? Where am I a healer? Where am I a child? Where am I a mother? Where am I a bad mother? We've got to find all these roles inside us and learn how we relate to that part of the potential of being human before you can sit in a room with a client who's got this kind of complexity and they won't feel judged. And then the best bit of all, you get to heal as the practitioner. Your practice can become a journey of putting you together. And I just think everyone can potentially benefit from that. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Not easy work, Gerri. Demanding. Yes. You got to be at times vulnerable, at times brutal, ruthless, weird mix. But if you can integrate these things, go slow, that was my dream for the podcast. But I feel like we're just coming to the end of our little time today, and I have a bit of news and also a cliffhanger, Gerri. she says in the spirit of transparency. Yeah, we're going to have a cliffhanger over the Christmas break. And here's what it's going to be. The cliffhanger is, I want more numinosity in our interactions. That's what I want. That's my request, not demand, because that's ridiculous. That's even if I tried to pull off a demand. So I want to hold us on the fire of transformation, because I actually need that to receive the energy to keep doing the work because of my health issues, whatever. I just don't have the energy to go into endless analysing clinical psychology models, because I do find that quite boring at my stage of practice. I want to go into the deep end. That's where I get a feeling of excitement and inspiration from. And that's just me. If you can't meet me in that, then that is the truth of it, and I need to accept it. But that's what I would like. That's my request to you. And the cliffhanger is, I'm going to have to wait for Christmas to figure out if we make it to season 2.
What season 2 will look like.
Yes, because the other, just a quick other note. So you and I have spoken a lot about what we wanted to do for the podcast. And I know you've got different ideas, and that is perfectly legitimate and understandable. And you feel inspired perhaps by a different format. So what may happen as a result of our cliffhanger is we might, Gerri might find herself on her own channel, which is another way this could resolve. So we've got to I guess if we just stick to the authentic truth of it, it should show us the way, whatever it is. I've got to be willing to accept it.
It possibly will, yes. Because
okay, yeah. Yes.
I have a lot more stories, that's for sure.
Oh, good. Yeah, for sure. So that was my cliffhanger, beautifully sculpted, I think. Just lunged into Doesn't have to be perfect. That's okay. That's all right. So did you want to make any little comments about that now, Gerri, or do you want to take the Christmas period?
I will just reference a favourite thinker of our time.
Oh, yeah.
Who is Christian Lander. He is the author of various books.
Oh, dear. Yep. Just
but also a blog, and for you to stuffwhitepeoplelike.com.
The crazy white people. Yeah.
It's a satirical look at, hipsters, left-leaning North Americans. And he says one of the easiest ways, so stuff white people like, there's a massive list. You'll be interested to know, I should read you the top 5 of the list.
Yep, all right. Okay.
There's coffee. There's religions. So number 1 is coffee. That's stuff white people like.
Yeah.
Number 2, religions their parents don't belong to. Number 3, film festivals. Number 4, assists. I think it's a basketball thing, not sure. Number 5, farmers markets. Number 6, organic food. Number 7, diversity. Number 8, Barack Obama. Number 9, making you feel bad about not going outside.
Oh, yeah.
And number 10, Wes Anderson movies.
Oh, right. Okay.
However, right now, might I refer you to number 134, the TED Conference.
Oh, yeah.
One of the easiest ways to create something that white people like is to create something that will allow them to feel smart. It doesn't require a large amount of work, time, or effort.
Bless.
Bless. Hence the TED Talk. Unfortunately, being able to create something that makes you feel smarter without having to do a lot of work has been very difficult. So only a few ideas have ever gained traction with white people, the most notable of which being documentary films and public radio. However, in the past decade, a new item has been added to this very short list, TED Talks. So the essence of that is
Gerri.
We can learn things without it being very difficult if we're white people.
If we're white, yes.
If we know the secret of that.
I've got both sides of that conversation in my identity, so I get it.
Yes,
a lot of conflict.
Really, I think the underlying message here under the jokes is really you can't. You can't learn anything without it being a little bit hard, which is what you just said in a different way.
Oh, yeah, that's a good tie up there, Gerri. Good summary, very deep, good work. I love it.
Yes. Good tie-in and a popular culture recommendation. So you don't get much better than that before Christmas.
So happy Christmas, everyone who is eavesdropping, and I found a fun Christmas message on the bloody description. So hopefully you can get a laugh out of that, and we'll see if we make it to season 2 next year. See if we do.
Stay tuned. Bye.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.